Hey, Rise Up Nation. Welcome back for another episode of Rise Up in Real Estate. And I've got a great friend of mine from the frozen tundra out in Wisconsin, Mr. Daniel Bertelson.
Hey,
and I'll jump right in with Daniel in a second. I wanted to say a few things as we get started, just a little bookkeeping stuff. Thank you, Lisa. I was going to say that first, and I don't like to brag. My editor let me know this is our 100th episode, which I think they said only 7% of podcasts make it past 20. So I like to talk. We're going to keep rolling. Thanks, Lisa. The other thing is, Dan, I wanted to let you know we're live today, and we'll have people hopping on with questions and stuff like Lisa. Lisa's actually in the office with Kristen and Megan in Atlanta. You might have met Lisa over the years, but we've got viewers from everywhere. They'll be popping in, asking questions. I'll flash them up there. You're familiar with StreamYard. But what we do with this Monday episode, we'll go for 45 minutes to an hour. Take this episode next week. I'll edit it this week, and it'll show up as a podcast, edited podcast on all the podcast channels next Monday. And next Sunday, I'll send you all the collaterals, like the pictures they use, so you can use it however you want to. So enough about that. I'm 100. I tell people I'm 56. I tell people I'm halfway to 112. So I guess this episode means we're halfway to 200, which I'm excited about. So, cool. But Dan, it's an honor to have you on. And, I asked a bunch of my friends if anybody would want to be on the show, and you were one of the first ones to raise your hand. And let's start by saying, why would you volunteer to come on a show like this?
You just said it to me first, but I'm just honored to be a part of something that's as consistent and awesome as a podcast that makes it to 100 episodes. And I think that I would take any opportunity to spend time with you specifically. But I mean, in our network, when we get an opportunity to share, we just got back from a conference. There's the gold. The gold is always in these conversations. It's very, don't get me wrong. I don't want to take anything away from presenters or people that give classes or instruction and, formal education. We get all that. But the real gold, I think, usually comes from just having conversations with two people that trust each other a lot, but then also just when you know that somebody else is giving it the same amount of, gusto and heart and sacrifice as you, it's a great thing to be a part of, no matter whether it's a podcast or a quick meeting or a luncheon. I complain a little bit to the agents. Sometimes I'm like, hey, the show up factor I talk a little bit about. Sometimes it's like, you got to show up, you got to be seen, you got to be present, all those things. This is showing them that I do those things too, right? So when those of us that, whether we're self-proclaimed leaders or elected ones or anything else, it's nice to be able to show leadership through just participation. And yeah, man, honor is mine. So
that's great. So you are such a, I just can't wait. I got lots of questions. So I'm going to start by tell us where you are and what your role is in your organization, like who you're with, how long and stuff.
So it's definitely been a morphing, but 22 years with the RE/MAX brand in the greater Madison, Wisconsin area, South Central. We're about 2.5 hours from Chicago, just northwest of there. So a lot of people, we're by the big lakes. So we get all of Western Canada's weather. It sees the Great Lakes, takes a nice, awesome dip dive down and covers our state. So, it's frozen at least a couple months out of the year, and we get some really wild weather in between. I started in RE/MAX as an agent with my mother-in-law, who at the time I was getting out of law enforcement and I was in the Army, and I was serving in the war over in Iraq, and I had just started in the business. And it was one of those things where, she's like, you'd be really good at this, and I started thinking about it. And I'm like, well, what would make me really good at it? And long story short, because that's a 22-year long thing, but we slowly but surely we were working as agents in one office. We ended up about 9 years after being a team together, bought out a franchise that was existing after the 08-09 kind of fallout, and we took over in 2011 with a brokerage that had about 60 people in it and 6 or 7 offices at the time. And so we literally walked in the door to people, and I tell the long story to make it very short. Was we walked into a room, we told everybody, listen, this isn't the way a brokerage should be attended to. This is definitely not how a RE/MAX should be run. It should be much better than where things are at right now. Give us one year, and if it's not 150% better, we'll help you move to whatever office you should move to. And we kept everybody, but one, I should say. Honestly, we did have one person that didn't stick with us, but we were so blessed to have all those people believe in us and let us lead them and guide them. Now we have 14 offices and 125 agents, and it was a process where I've taken definitely a lot of different jobs. I built our sub media company and ran that for a little while. I wasn't selling for a very long time. Now I help the commercial division doing their thing, certainly ancillary businesses. So when you say what is your role, the official title right now is, I think, Director of Opportunities. I think I also assign myself Ambassador of Change. But I like that last one a lot because it just has to keep changing anyway. But at the end of the day, now with a recent merger with RE/MAX Grand, we have this awesome succession plan. And so my mother-in-law, who is still very much active in the business and everything else, has, been able to take some additional time and not be running the brokerage with us anymore. And now I've brought on junior partners and people that are going to be running it after I'm gone. And it feels so good to have that consistent energy and not the wonder of what will happen someday or whatever. So the current role, though, is still jack of all trades, master of none, perhaps. But I think now, more than any time in my past, it's more defined. And I think as a small business owner, man, does that get cloudy sometimes. What am I doing? How am I doing it? Where am I doing it? Who am I doing it with? All of those questions. But I mean, having colleagues like yourself, you've been at some of those too, without the groups of people that we've met with to solve those same or similar problems across the country. And I will argue our network is second to none when it comes to helping for nothing. I wouldn't be where we are today without this network and without people like you helping along the way. But yeah, my role now is to just kind of help direct who's going to have what role and how they're going to do it, and a little bit less of the doing and a little bit more of the strategy and execution.
Awesome. I saw that Lisa had put, thank you for your service. And of course, I feel that way. My co-host normally on the show, Vince, is an Air Force guy, and he would love to spend some time chatting with you about that, I'm sure.
Heck yeah.
Did you, so when she told you, your mother-in-law, and bless our mother-in-laws, right? When they tell us something like she told you think you'd be good at this, what do you think she had in mind? And it sounds like when you tell your story, it's not, she might have had in mind a sales idea. You could probably really sell some stuff, but what you've done is entrepreneurial in a way. It's different. Yeah. But tell me that.
And I think that was simple looking back now, simple for me and her. My father was he franchised what used to be called Value Right Pharmacies. He was, an old compounding pharmacist who would, I would go with him and deliver prescriptions to the doors of old ladies who couldn't get in, to pick up their meds that day. And that's what you did at the end of the day. After he worked 12 hours, it's like, now I'm going to go volunteer, because it's not like they were charging for deliveries back then, or anything like that. But watching entrepreneurs work, my mother-in-law as well, she ran a flower shop before she got into real estate with her sister. So again, inter-family businesses and things like that. But that entrepreneurial spirit was alive both in my parents, in my in-laws, the people I was around, the town I was in. So, in my 20s, I was the president of the Chamber of Commerce in my town, which both my mother-in-law and my father were both past presidents of, that kind of thing. So definitely some legacy, environment there of just pushing to do the same things I was seeing growing up. I think it led, funny enough now looking back, but, being in law enforcement, taking, tests in high school or stuff, what are you going to do when you grow up type of thing. And it was like, I'm going to have to be around people. I'm going to have to be around people a lot. I wanted my day to be different every day. I wanted it to be exciting. I wanted it to be fun, all these things. Law enforcement was right at the top, and it was always there. So that's kind of where my life started. And then, the structure and some of the bureaucracy surrounded around those types of entities were a challenge for me. I have ADHD, have had it since I was young, but didn't get really treatment for it or anything until much later. And of course, things like war and other issues or whatever, I'm still growing up. And when I look back at those entrepreneurial moments of like making decisions and going forward, man, a lot of it had to do with just not being risk adverse, right? Like I didn't have time to think about it. My brain didn't do that. So you get medals in the Army for not thinking about things and helping people without thinking, right? Same thing in the Air Force, I'm sure. Pilots, like they have to be able to think really fast. Well, come to think about that, in the past, knowing what I know about my brain now and knowing how I work now as an older person and all of that stuff, it's kind of fun to think back on why I ended up as an entrepreneur instead of, working for someone else, which is a great thing for a lot of people. They need that structure. I needed that newness. I needed that, that new feeling each day of excitement. And certainly that's not always achievable. And sometimes the stress that comes along with new and change, again, I say the ambassador of change, but nobody really likes change. So I kind of dubbed myself the person who's going to help everybody change, whether they like it or not. And I think that's all there is to do with small business. If you're just not constantly evolving and changing, you're going to struggle no matter what line of work we're going to be in. Right. So, hey, Robert.
Yeah, that's interesting. Because you, as an outsider looking at the military.
Yeah.
And I get what you're saying. Like you do get medals for making split-second decisions that save people's lives. But in my mind, the first thing I went to is you have to be uber prepared.
Yeah.
And you spend almost all of your career, if I'm not misunderstanding, preparing for that moment that you have to make the decision. Is it the same way in business?
It's funny because, that the old Boy Scout motto, right? Be prepared. And I was a Boy Scout, and I certainly, the skills that I learned there helped me in business, helped me in life, and everything else. And, but when I was growing up and being prepared was one part, but I think adaptability was actually what made me excel in both the Army and in small business. And that's actually the lack of preparedness. And so I think you hit on something that's both very important. Like I just met with somebody who wants to get into our business the other day, a new licensee recruit. And when I tell them what they need to be ready, it's very different from what some of our competitors tell them what they need to be prepared and be ready. And they look at me and they go, I don't have that much money yet. I don't have 6-7 months to go without pay of stress, or whatever. Or I ask them, is your spouse supportive of you getting into a small business? And let alone real estate, or whatever. Because if after 2 or 3 months, if somebody's already knocking on your door saying it doesn't look like you were prepared enough, well, it's not necessarily that. It's, were you able to adapt? And so I think preparedness is a huge, huge good thing. But I also think the ability to adapt on the fly is what makes a good small business person a great one, for sure.
Yeah, that's cool. We look at it when we're looking to talk to new licensees and people getting into our business. We have 6 different things we look for specifically, and one of them is that resilience, that adaptability, being able to, I love that quick. And I know we have our conversations about people like Darren Hardy and stuff, but right. Darren would say, Darren always says that small businesses get lost in the time that they take to make a decision.
I would argue too, because I've had some, business partners and my mother-in-law, that when you're talking about risk assessment, because that's essentially all your decisions every day as a business owner are risk assessments. Am I going to do this with my time? Am I going to do this with my money? Am I going to do this with my energy? Am I going to do this with my heart? Right. And we can expend all of these things, and we do. I mean, we use it all, right? But when we use it, and more importantly, as we mature in business, when we learn to protect it, and, you would probably agree, when you can learn to say no to those proper things so that you do have adaptable qualities in what's available to you. It's very, very hard, for instance, to make time when, for instance, back in the day, I would schedule my schedule full. Well, then it would make it very hard for me to be able to help somebody on the fly or adapt, to something that was open. So you could argue right there, that's a perfect example. Time management is a combination of being hyper prepared and adaptable, and learning over time how to manage that schedule. And being able to say no, it was always a struggle for me. I think it's always a struggle for anybody who likes to help other people.
Yeah.
But if you don't learn how to do it, your small business will get stuck, and it gets stuck in sitting there going, I'm too busy. Well, that's your fault. I wish people would have said that to me more often. That's your fault. When I would whine or complain about something, I wish I'd have heard that more often. That's your fault.
Yeah, you might have heard that in the military. They don't hesitate to tell you what they
think. No,
we get a little bit soft
with that on top of it, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I like that. So we have a saying sometimes that I came up with this a few years ago, but it fits this conversation. Is I don't stress out so much, and I talk to Mandy about this all the time about making the right decision. I struggle. I concentrate more on making the decision right.
I love that.
Changing the order of those words for me, because you can stress yourself out, and we do, about is that the right opportunity? Whereas if I'd have just dove in and used my character, my intellect, my work ethic, my resources to make that decision right. Now, there are some yes or no's that are clear ethically and legally, right? Morally. But in most cases, we're trying to get better at that. Making it right.
Well, I think you bring up an important question, and that is it's priority, right? What's taken priority over any given thing on any given day, and that does become really difficult. I mean, certainly too. I'm midlife, so it's like 3 kids that are in the middle of the mix. I got a 15, 13, and 9-year-old. My wife and we've been together for 28 years, and business partners, both past, now present, growth, all that kind of stuff, and it gets very difficult, to decide how you're going to manage that and how you're going to decide what you're going to do next. The paralysis by analysis, I think, was the old saying. We hear it all the time. That's real. Done in this industry, and I use video as the example, or even what you and I are doing right now. Done 100 episodes, and I don't care. I really don't care what other people think. It's an amazing feat to do this podcast for 100 episodes. It's absolutely insane to me.
Thank you. And I've had a lot of times, I don't get paralysis by analysis too much with video. I probably should. I don't use scripts. I don't know why. Back in 2001, when I did my first one, I just said, I'm just going to do it. And I love to talk. You know that.
Yeah.
Hey, Nimesh, nice to see you, my friend. This is a resource beyond resources. He's been on the show before. And I should shout out to Robert. Thanks for being here, Robert. I don't know. Dan was at R4. I don't know where you were. You didn't see him. He was right there.
Yeah, right. I missed you. Sorry, Robert. And it's your town, too.
Yeah, man. All right, Robert. I love that. And then we've got somebody else coming in here, Madeline Hammer. Can't wait to listen. Well, you're listening, so you guys throw questions up here. I'm trying to stump Dan, and you try to stump me. Dan, I want to mention, too, everything you say leads me down a path. And this is what we do on this show. It's our hunt for the extraordinary. We're on a unicorn hunt. That's what I call it. Yeah. We're trying to figure out, what about you is so special? And I believe every person sitting in your seat, I can find that. I don't care who it is. So we're talking a little bit about that. Robert brought up R4. And I wanted to ask you, then we won't spend a lot of time on this, but you've been in this business 22 years. I don't know how many of these conferences you've been to, how many learning opportunities you have, but it's intriguing to me. Look at that. He keeps his badge. A few. I love that. Keeps his badges. That's his
only about 35, 40 grand worth of them. So, when people ask about what your education is, don't be afraid to tell them you went to a bunch of conferences.
Yeah, but you're probably not walking in there. How do you prepare? What are you thinking when you sign up? Is it a habit? Tell me your philosophy, because I know there's a lot of people listening that are new, or I don't want to spend the money, or I just can't take the time, or I've already heard it all. Talk to us.
I think this really just comes down to diversifying where your business comes from. And I think for anybody that's in this brand, and I know you and I aren't sitting over here stumping on this brand today, but the network of going specifically to R4. I think I've gone the last 15 years in a row, minus the COVID year. And, there's even people that went that year, but every single year that I go, I take extreme value away from it for my brain, for my heart, for my soul, and I take financial gain away from me every year. Robert, who's on here, Nimesh, who's on here, these people I've worked active referrals with every single year, Bald Guy Army, Robert. But yeah, every single year, the trip has always been paid for, every single year. Financially, it's always been paid for. The things I just spoke about, as far as getting some motivation that we all need sometimes to keep going as a small business owner, the motivation to keep going in this industry when stuff gets thrown at us. You have to have, and Valerie just said something, like the heart to do all this, the heart to do all this stuff. Even Valerie, who's a coach, that has helped me in the past too, and spoken at events that I was at. Mm-hmm. You then connect with those people later on, and she's helped me with personal conversations. You have too, like you start to become family with these people when you see them every single year. And I know for some people, they go, well, maybe someday I'll go and spend that money. And I just, my big plea to everybody that might be watching this, you just start going and you'll never not go. Lisa, who's one of the agents that went along with me, she started going just a couple of years ago. She'll never miss. She'll never miss now. And I think, it's weird, but even you said, I kind of went with the same attitude. I saw your video this morning from the recap. What's RE/MAX? God, I need something this year. RE/MAX, show me something, show me something. I need something. And man, it's been 2024. I think everybody got to where they needed to go, but it was all uphill. It was all into the wind. It was snowing every day. Like it was hard. 2024 was hard. And yet I feel completely rejuvenated. And I always do after I go to R4. I feel so great. You see all these other people that are in the same boat, different parts of the country, different markets. Heck, we're in a bubble where we're at. We're still dealing with 30 offers on listings. Other places are already having 20 listings, sit, so it's just, wow. Is it amazing to be able to connect with people from all those different markets,
Yeah. We were doing this show last week, live in Vegas, and we had a couple walk up from Brazil. Awesome. And then we had a couple walk up from Costa Rica. And then we had a couple walk up from the only two people from South Africa and RE/MAX that came.
Awesome.
Were at R4 and stood at our camera and talked a little bit about what, and for me, someone said this to me, like I asked my wife this question, and I asked somebody else this, like, why would you do that? And she goes, well, the way that I look at it is if you're not at the table, you might be on the menu.
I love that.
Don't you want to hear? Don't you want to be prepared? Don't you want to know and hear firsthand? And I really appreciate that about you, because honestly, are you going to hear a new method that you're going to adapt? Like we go to 501, which is
right.
I brainstorm. They call it a mastermind, which I appreciate that title more.
Sure.
But let's be honest, our businesses were built from that room.
You got it.
With those relationships.
You got it. And I think that there's one thing, like, we can always go back to COVID and remember what it was like to be Zooming all the time or be in this, but then when we physically would all go and get into a room together, it's different. Let's just face it. It's just different. And you form real relationships and real bonds. You and I were talking a little bit before too about just like, what makes someone special, or like, how do you do this quietly? And I think there's so many people in the network that are so humble that have helped, over the years. To your point, in that room, it's people sharing because they had someone else share to them. I can give a big shout out to like Jeff Benson, who is now, retired out of the system. He joined RE/MAX when there was 800 people total. There's 145,000 now. And he would come to meetings and help. He had no reason to. He didn't need to, all that kind of stuff. And I think we continuously have a new crop of people just like yourself, like you were up on that panel along with Nimesh and those guys, like giving your gold away because someone else gave it to you. And I think that passing on, not only is that a cool small business thing, but it's special in our network. It really is. And I know that I've gone to other conferences and I have, been along with other people in their journeys to their conferences and things like that. And I'm like, oh, that's different. So I think from that standpoint, we have something different, and it is amazing. Robert, yeah, I'd met him in person at that event. Wouldn't know him otherwise, and it was at least 10 plus years ago. So, and now being able to even we send each other our family Christmas cards and we actually read them. Right. So it's amazing that we, and the authentic, I appreciate your comment there, TJ, like surround yourself with like-minded people, but that word authentic is right there. That's what I did a podcast on that from R4 with somebody else about being authentic, and it's scary. So if you were to ask me again, Tad, what makes me special or unique? I am a person who is afraid of a lot of things. And I'm more afraid of what other people think than probably anybody believes. But it does never stop me then from just saying what I need to say, doing what I need to do. Heck, I even got a nickname for a tiny little while there where it was like, oh, there's Angry Dan, at the meetings or whatever. And it's like, yep, I can show you exactly where the most stressful times in my life were, when you're more frustrated with things in general. But I'll admit to that. I like admitting to my coworkers, fellow leadership, and even people like you, and wide open on this podcast. I'm an extremely flawed human being, or whatever. And that doesn't determine your success. I actually think the more you fail and screw up and can be humble about it and be honest with yourself, but more importantly, can you apologize? Can you do that well? And if you can, you're gonna kick butt. And when you go to these meetings or you go to a conference, you're gonna get more out of it when you can do that and admit where your faults are, because your faults are gonna help people way more than your successes.
Yeah, I love that, Dan. It's interesting. You didn't know this. TJ and I were texting last night. TJ's a team leader in our office and also a great friend of mine. I wish TJ could share what I said about you, Dan, last night, which is exactly what you just said about yourself. And it's so refreshing. And my argument has always been, and you're making the point so clear, like you and I have had, we won't go into a lot of detail, but we have had a moment where we connected at a pretty deep level over something really hard.
Very hard.
And my philosophy is we really actually connect over our failures and weaknesses. And that's why social media is so hard for me.
Yeah.
Because a lot of it is everybody's fluffed up successes, and there's a place for it, right? I understand you can use it. I mean, nobody uses it better than the mesh. But for me, when you find out somebody's been there, and so have you, now we're on to something. Now we trust more, we believe more. Appreciate you, Robert. I should also say, Valerie, glad to have you on here too. That's an honor to have you on the show.
Valdar, you bet. Yeah, she's amazing. And I would argue so Valerie, Namesh, all these people, and this is actually a great segue into that. What makes you unique or what makes you authentic is, please don't hide who you are on social media. People ask all the time, how do I separate myself out in this business? Like as a team leader, how do I separate myself amongst even other people within the same brand and everything else? And I would argue it's being who you are and not hiding it. When I first started in the business, I did not tell people that I was a metal drummer and that I had purple hair when I still had hair. And grew up on Metallica and different things like that, because I was afraid of the judgment from other people and how that would affect my business. And all I can say now is don't ever be afraid of sharing who you are, especially on social media. I mean, you got to look at it like it's an advertising platform. So if you're an agent out there who's very negative all the time, or you're out there just playing politics on the platform or whatever else, it's not going to serve you well. But if you are, for the most part, positive, for the most part, telling your story authentically, don't be afraid of the negative stuff. Don't be afraid to tell people that you've failed. I know I've failed as a father many different times, as a husband, as a friend, as like so many different aspects. And to your point, connecting with other business owners and people that you are regularly in contact with about something personal deepens that relationship. It deepens the level of trust. How is that any different from our relationship with our clients? Sure. I talk to you way more than I'll talk to some of my past clients, within a year's time frame or whatever. That doesn't mean, there's any importance that's better over here or over there. It just means I have a deeper connection with that person. I've probably shared more, or they've helped me more. Right. And it's timing. I don't think a lot of people give enough credit to that either. Sometimes there's times in your life where, I don't remember the old saying when it comes to friends, are they there for a season or they're there for life, and, all that, but it is true. There's been years, and I know for you, where, man, this is the worst year of my life. And it took the other 5 people in our group to prop that person up, call them and check on them, stuff like that. You and me, we've had that throughout those years. And then just because things get better for one person doesn't mean somebody else isn't going to need our help. And that's that just goes back, really to TJ's comment too. Surrounding yourself with those people. I use that in recruiting all the time. Why would you want to surround yourself with people that average this when you can average this? Well, that's just true. It just is. Doesn't have to be for a financial stat, but wouldn't you be around people that want to help and want to give you free advice or this, that, and the other, versus ones that are only worried about themselves, and their own face and their own sign and their own everything, right? Ego is such a thing. So
that's awesome. So Shayla says 2 solid leaders, and there's actually a lot of you're not talking about the 2 of us. You're talking about yourself, the mesh, TJ, Robert, Don.
Right.
Don's on here too. I don't know if you saw that. Don's just look at that's a sharp. I need to have a headshot that looks like that, Don. You look very professional. I love that. Learning from each other's best.
Missing those ties, aren't we?
I know, man. Ties. I just wear a bow tie everywhere I went. Here's what I said about you last night on text to TJ. Used his favorite word. TJ's favorite word is authenticity. So when I knew you were going to be on here, I said, you got to hear this guy, because that's exactly who he is too. So, and it's interesting, like in this world of we're a pretty public business.
Yeah.
I mean, if you don't believe it, just look at the lawsuit that just unfolded. We're very in the public eye. But I knew this would happen. And we talked about this before the show. You're humble. Everybody can feel it when you talk, Dan. Everybody knows that you are in it for something more than yourself. It just comes across in your persona. It comes across in the things that you do, I'm sure, in your community and with your agents and staff. But it's interesting to me that humility and servant leadership still has a place in this very public thing that we do. Talk about that for a minute. Maybe it's your nature and you don't even know how to do it otherwise, but talk to me about that for a minute.
What's funny? I mean, you bring that up, and the first thing that comes to my mind is actually fear. And the fear that used to be involved with what will be my reputation? What will be people's opinions? Go Army. Hell yeah.
That's my co-host Vince. He's popping in here.
But that fear that drives what other people are going to think. And we talk about it all the time. It's that reluctance to, this person's going to think this about me. This person's going to think that about me. And I'm going to be the first to tell everybody, well, screw that, to do it anyway, because what other people think doesn't matter. And I think I told you, Daniel, my name is Daniel. God is my judge. That's the only person I care about. But I would argue some of that being humble, I would actually do differently. And to your point, maybe you just do it on accident. I think I do. But I think also everything is on some sort of a spectrum. And I think I'm not out there as much as Nimesh or even yourself, out there as much as I maybe could be. But I think your reputation comes from the fear of character stuff, right? We all have values that we're trying to live up to. I'm trying to live up to values that I believe were taught to me by my parents, taught to me in the military, certainly. And then just ones I think I inherently got, from my creator, and that stuff I'm trying my best to live up to. The fear comes in admitting to everybody that you're not perfect and that maybe you're not humble. Maybe you come off humble, but maybe you're not. Maybe inside you're not as humble. And so you could go, at the end of a day, you could be upset with the fact that somebody else beat you at something, or, won that listing. Or you could take a minute and decide, no, I'm going to shift my attitude. And I'm going to shift my attitude to what can I learn from this defeat? And how much better am I going to feel when I call that agent and congratulate them on getting that listing, and, kind of talk a little smack to them and let them know, by the way, I'm going to sell it, first anyway, and they're going to wish they had hired me, or whatever. It's like, right. So you could twist that attitude on that very same success or failure. And it could change that reputation that you have. And right. I think it goes way under the radar, as far as, like you were saying, like humble. A lot of the authentic messages and things that I do share, you'll never see, because they're direct messages, because they're private. And they're about things that, quite honestly, aren't everyone's business all at once. And I do still carry a large amount of fear of being judged by other people. And so, to your point, in this business, we have to be seen. We have to be out there. It is somewhat public. I even just learned recently, a friend of mine, a friend that I've been friends with for 36 years, really doesn't like this stuff, really doesn't like the social media aspect of life in general, but certainly thinks I shouldn't be doing, putting stuff out there about myself and all these other things. And I had no idea this person felt that way. And so I can let that do two things now going forward. I can say, well, I'm never going to do a podcast again. I'm never going to put myself out there again, because gosh, what if there's other people that feel the same way he does, or whatever else. Or I can continue to say, hey, whatever fills my cup and whatever I feel is right, I should do. Believe in myself. Because the more that you start listening to what other people believe, and you start second guessing yourself, now you're into confidence issues. You're into other things that you get into up in your mind. And if there's one thing that I've been really open with you about, it's been the challenges of our mind and our brain. What makes me unique is I have a absolutely wild amount of life experience for a 44-year-old human. There are very few people that I can get into a room with and not relate to on some level based on personal experience. And if there's anything that comes down to, this being humble or being authentic part that bothers me or scares me most, is watching my kids. Instead of them going out and experiencing life, they're really okay with watching other people experience it. And that scares me a lot. And I think that could translate into what we do in real estate too, where we watch someone else do it and we see maybe something not work out for them or whatever. So now we're not going to do it too, or whatever. Or if this podcast got broken into and bombed, and all of a sudden there were swear words all over the screen, and it was really unprofessional all of a sudden because something got hacked or something. I'm never doing that again. I mean, who didn't have that happen during COVID, during like a large company Zoom or something, and you could say, well, I'm not going to do that anymore because I'm scared. Or you're going to say, what did I learn from that anyway? And keep going. So, yeah.
I told you before, before we started the show that my goal on this show is to always dig and find the gold in each person. And I don't know if you recognize it, but at the 37-minute mark, we found it, Dan. I appreciate you so much. And I'll just show you some of the comments if you don't think I'm telling the truth.
Sure.
We got Vince Ramsey on here, and then we have Ramsey Stewart. I love that. Thanks for talking about this. I struggle so much with this. Thank you, Ramsey, for sharing that. It's hard when our industry is typically money hungry and arrogant. Ironically, when I read that comment, I thought it was Vince. I just automatically went to Vince in my mind, and I'm like, that he and I talk about that. TJ also said, I appreciate you saying this because I admit I go through the same emotions. Great discussion. I mean, if you want any more confirmation, and I love this, Don. They don't call it, if you're not falling down, you're not skiing, right?
Yeah.
So get up. I love the fear conversation. Ramsey's going to chime in again right here. I've become so involved in my community. I just want to thrive. I'm struggling with attaching realtor to anything because of the industry norms. Well, let's talk about that for a second.
That's perfect right there, because that's exactly what I'm talking about. So many people during our lawsuit were worried about so many things. And if there's one thing that we now know coming into the year, a whole year later, we're running into clients like crazy that had no clue what was going on. And in fact, emotionally as an industry, if we had not reacted so poorly, because we do have a lot of people in our industry that are extremely emotionally immature and got hyper defensive. Well, when you're attacked by your own government, you probably should get a little defensive, but a lot of people took to the airwaves, took to their, their platforms or whatever to basically defend themselves. And I think that's become a societal norm. I think it's a cultural thing that's really kind of messed up, that we're always on this constant defense. And I think that hurts us with our confidence levels. It hurts us with trying to move forward. And it can even tie into what we were talking about earlier with making decisions, because we are in a fear mongering society. Everything we're being sold is now being sold based on fear. There's so little advertising out there. Otherwise, Ramsey, I really don't think you should ever worry about attaching yourself to a group of people, because if they know you, they won't believe in what that greater whole is. And if they don't know you yet, and they are judging an entire group of people, based on this thing, because we do have an industry reputation. I'm not trying to say that we don't, but we have people that for instance, didn't watch the news in 2024, not once. I just decided not to. It was an election year. I knew it was going to be ugly. My life was better because of it. It didn't affect my business. All of those things, right? I think if we just keep our head down and be who we are, there's always going to be big reputations and big things that happen, and that we can't control, but we can control what fear does to us. And that's probably, in these last couple of years of my life, that's my main focus, is I need to control what's going on with the fears of the different parts of the world and myself. I have to, because otherwise they'll get you. Eventually they'll get you.
Yeah. Excellent. Thanks, Ramsey, for being just open with that. I appreciate that. Don, we do record this. And actually we edited. This will be the podcast that goes on Spotify next week under the same name, Rise Up in Real Estate. But if you'll shoot me your email, or Dan can, I'll get you the copy of this. I can forward you the link right after this is over. And
hi, Jory. Good to see you. Jory is also somebody who used to be with our region and now is with another private RE/MAX company. Just amazing people, personal sacrifices and stories throughout all of these groups of people. I can't say enough for it. Thanks for drawing it out, Tad, today, obviously, and talking about this, but everybody needs to get a little bit more open, get a little bit more authentic with where you're at, because people are going to love you. They're not going to care, about your industry or whom you're attached to,
Yeah. And I think, so you're all saying this is gold. Like, it's just, Vince says it's gold. Robert says, I agree. Humbleness and authenticity rule. You just said it a minute ago that, Dan, that for a 44-year-old, you have a tremendous bunch of life experience, right? And that's your secret sauce. And then we're all talking about how great we are connecting with you. But I want everybody to recognize why. Like, why does Dan have this? Some of it's circumstantial, maybe, but you wouldn't have had the military experience if you wouldn't have raised your hand.
I skipped biology and made a horrible decision to join the Army instead of the Air Force. That's really where that's at,
Yeah, there you go. See, Vince, I'm sure Vince is going to pipe up on that.
Right.
But you have this life experience because in my opinion, you've raised your hand and you said, hey, I want to have kids. I want to get married. I want to run an organization. I want to do this or that. I want to be involved in my community. I want to have this hard conversation with Jory or with Tad or with Vince or with whoever. And it doesn't happen one-sided. It doesn't happen one-sided. It happens because in my opinion, you are available. Like, you are open. Not every conversation we have on this show is this open. It's not this free-flowing, because not every guest is comfortable with fear, comfortable with their own skin, and being able to say, hey, I might have been angry, Dan.
Well, and I would honestly, it's funny you bring, because the fear portion, when that starts to overrule what your decisions are, and how you're going to be, right? And it can feed into everything. When fear starts to edge up and win your decisions for you, that's when stress goes to the highest amounts. That's when you're going to say things to people you love that you didn't mean, or like you're going to let that stress affect you. It certainly is going to affect your business. It's going to affect your coworkers. It's going to affect everything around you. And I think what's kept me on track long enough was, yes, I raised my hand. And I was definitely like, when Talladega Nights came out, and I laughed my butt off watching that movie. But one of the quotes, if you're not first, you're last. No one ever said that to me when I was young, but second place never really did feel very good. Now they're trying, now I can argue that ninth place is supposed to feel good, with the way things are. And I'm going, that wouldn't have motivated me to be better. When I was a deputy sheriff for a little while, there was a line in how long it would be before I could reach this next spot. Same thing in the military. All right, I got to wait for all these people to be promoted. So that was really difficult for me. That's why I was so drawn to real estate once I started getting into it. And I realized, like, oh my gosh, I'm going to get rewarded for raising my hand first, for showing up first, for staying late, for doing all those things. Now, that can be a curse just as much as it is a blessing. But I knew at the age of 23, when that first commission check kind of went all the way around through, I was like, I don't care how much money I make in this. I'm never working for somebody else for the rest of my life. And yet at the same time, I have always needed leadership, and I still want structure. I still want that. And I got that from the network. I got that from even the leadership throughout, at LLC in our region and those things. Walter Schneider, big shout out to him, who used to own our region. And people guided you along the way. And I still needed that structure. I still needed that hierarchy. I still needed people to look up to. But man, I wanted to make all my own decisions. And that's what I love, about doing this kind of stuff too. You could have cut me off and, not had me on the show or whatever. And I could have said, well, I'll go start my own podcast that day, yeah, or whatever. Right. So I don't know.
That's awesome. I love that. Vince, I think, let's see, was that fear tough to face when choosing to get out of the military? Mm-hmm. And how was that translated to how you face your career in real estate? So Vince has got a story. He was with the Air Force 8 or 9 years and left voluntarily to do this and do other things. So I'm sure you guys can relate.
I think for me, it was pretty easy just because, I was in law enforcement and then got deployed to Iraq. I was gone for quite a long time. I was there or my deployment was, I think, November of 2003, and I got home in April of 2005. So, I was 23 years old when I left and almost 25 when I came home. And one of the biggest fears that I had while I was gone was the whole world was going to pass me by while I was off doing that, because every day felt like an eternity. Being away from your family, being, obviously in a few situations there where I was afraid for my life often. But that fear of leaving structure, Vince, would have been my biggest fear. Was I'm going to leave this structured environment that has always helped me, and I was like, if I'm doing this on my own, am I really going to do it? No one's going to be yelling at me. No one's going to, be screaming at me to get out of bed and go do this every day if I didn't have that structure. So I think that was probably the biggest fear, but I just, didn't want to run a gun anymore. I had seen enough of what I needed to see in that, world or environment. And so I was actually welcoming something new. And real estate was it was fun. I mean, I came home in 2005 and I remember going to a listing. I looked like I was 12. I had closed 2 transactions, but neither one of them were listings. And I went to this listing very fearful that they were going to ask me that horrible question. How many times have you done this? And I had done 0 listings. And here I am in this meeting thinking they just won't ask. This is going so well. And they must not know, because you just couldn't Google online and find out that somebody hadn't done any transactions back then, right? They knew the whole time. They actually picked me to interview me based on a voicemail I left them. And so once they interviewed me, they said they knew pretty quickly they were going to hire me, but they wanted me to sweat for a while. And I thought that was hilarious too. But they hired me knowing I was young, knowing I hadn't done it before. But the reasonings I gave them, which were, I sold them on who I was connected with already, you know, who I was being trained by, who this brand was and everything else. So that's what really turned my mind too, is because I took my greatest fear, and I got maybe really lucky, because my greatest fear turned into something where I was like, oh my God, those people actually looked at it as a positive. And I was blown away by that. And so that helped, that mindset shift on the fear piece of maybe you're afraid of something because it's just uncertain. And isn't that fear in general, uncertainty, right? And so what I just decided is like, you can't be certain that somebody's going to feel or think a certain way just because you do, you know, or whatever else. And I think that helped me a ton over the years.
Yeah, the whole show is about networking, Vince, and this is a good guy for you to connect to after this. Talk to Dan. He'll take
and we do have our new military and veterans group getting up and running for REMAX that LLC is supporting and everything. So Vince, I'll connect with you on that for sure, but pretty stoked about that. We got to meet and talk about that at R4 as well. So pretty excited. That's great.
Last thing I want to ask you, and then we'll wrap this up. Because I know everybody's got to go out there and conquer some fears. Tell me what, I'm assuming there's an answer to this. What is it about your daily, do you have a daily routine that allows you, that puts you in the best position to handle all of these things that you're talking about? The fear, the uncertainty, the trying to stay humble when you're really not, all the complicated things we talked about. Is there something in your daily routine that sets you on the right track?
Yeah. And I mean, it's probably to some, it might just be their standard already. Prayer is kind of a big thing that I didn't do for a good majority of my life. Whatever your beliefs are, doesn't really matter to me, but hopefully you're not carrying it all on your own. Hopefully you're understanding that you can carry it somewhere else, but I can even take it way back to the Miracle Morning book. That forcing to start the day a certain way, and I'll throw it into physical fitness because that's just such an easy correlation that drove actually everything else in my life. But it was like when I started figuring out that my mood and my emotions had a lot to do with how successful I was going to be that day, whether it was on a phone call, on a podcast, or anything else, then it came down to starting to be responsible for. So like when you're saying what routine, well, are you staying hydrated? Are you going to bed at a decent bedtime and getting up at the same time every day? I definitely now reflect and journal in the morning, even though that was something I didn't do right after I learned about the Miracle Morning, you know, or whatever. It wasn't something I implemented. I feel like I learned everything over the years, implemented very little until I realized, my God, what am I doing here? Every time I grab one thing that's new, I would recognize something that I wasn't doing that I had already learned, and it was certainly affecting me. So yes, consistency, as I think Jared James says it, consistency is undefeated, right? But I also think, you know, having that time in the morning with your own thoughts and your own brain, not at the end of the day, because you're fried, you're done. Right. And if you are stacking it in, and everybody used to say, you know, if you're, you know, 10 pounds of potatoes in a 5-pound bag or whatever, you see that, I didn't even cuss. I know there was at least some nerves about that today. But like when you think about that piece, I was always doing that. And then I would always say, that's okay. I don't need it. I don't need it. I don't need it. I used to always be able to sleep at, 5 hours of sleep, no problem. Boom, like go out and hammer it. But the decisions based on 5 hours of sleep, low hydration, didn't pray that morning, didn't gratitude journal, didn't thank my wife enough before I left the house, something. I was definitely hurting something along the way by not just following that stupid, consistent plan. And unfortunately, it's boring. And I think if a lot of us that have watched some big time coaches that are out there, success is pretty dang boring. Success is really boring. So
I love that. So that book he referenced, I think, is Hal Elrod.
oh yeah,
The Miracle Morning. Rennie Diedrich, our broker in charge and owner, swears by that book. So maybe you guys could pick that up. I'm looking through here. Jeremy Blanton's on here and said, "What's up, Daniel?" I don't know if you saw that.
yeah.
I don't know if Ramsey's talking to Jeremy or to you. Maybe Ramsey knows Jeremy. I'm not sure. There's just a family reunion happening here.
That's
and
right.
I appreciate you guys coming in. Like, see, Dan, you see the benefit of connecting it to your channels, because your authenticity speaks to the people that you bring on here. And I hope you guys will continue to follow. We do this every Monday at 10 o'clock during spring and fall semester. We take the summer off, just like our kids. I got 6 kids. I can't do it during the summer. And you know what you were talking about, like, it's crazy. So I come on the show. I left the house grumpy today. I did too. Out with my 7-year-old last night, and then again this morning. She's just like a battler, and she wants to battle. And today I felt like battling back. I walked out of the house just in a crummy mood, and Mandy called me on my way to work, and she said, "Hey, I just wanted to say have a great day." And I still was in a crummy mood. And this show, I knew before when I got on the show that I would just be talking to another real human being that's got problems and struggles. And this show's been more for me than for anybody else today, Dan. I appreciate you. I've got Tracy Huffman on here, just bought The Miracle Morning on Audible just after you mentioned that, Dan. I appreciate that. And Jeremy giving it his props too. But every once in a while, we have one of these on Rise Up in Real Estate that really speaks to me. And today has, Dan. I appreciate that.
You bet, man.
We were at the same conference for 4 or 5 days, never really had a chance to talk because we were all going our own way with our people and stuff. But I'm glad that you raised your hand again to be on the show, because it's been good for me, been good for our guests, and I hope it's been good to you too.
It's been an absolute honor, man. I really appreciate you having me. And yeah, I mean, same thing this morning. It was a Monday morning. Battled with the 13-year-old a little bit more than I wish I would have. And I guarantee you right after this, we get off, I'll be sending her a cute little note, that just says, "Daddy loves you. This morning was tough. Monday mornings can be tough. Hope you have a good day." And so even if I just take that out of this call, for myself, or whatever, it was way more than worth, the investment of time. And appreciate everybody that jumped on to say hello as well. Yeah, at least I got 2 big hugs out of you, Jeremy. I mean, we didn't get a lot of time either, but that's the way it goes, I guess. So,
Ramsey, go get your Monday morning time block. Rise Up Nation, thanks for being here. Again, this will be on Spotify and all your favorite channels, iHeart Music, next Monday. But Dan Bertelson, look him up in Wisconsin. Vince, connect to him. Thanks for your service, buddy, and I appreciate you today. Have a great one.
Have a great Monday, guys. Take care.